Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Thursday, July 17th, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. The weather in Riverside today will reach a high of 89.7 degrees Fahrenheit with a low of 66.4 degrees. It's a warm day, so remember to stay hydrated and find some shade if you're spending time outdoors. Coming up, we'll delve into the current economic landscape, specifically how new tariffs are influencing prices for consumers and businesses across the United States. We'll also investigate the impact of immigration enforcement and discuss why it may have contributed to job losses in California. All this and more coming up on Alex's News. Stay tuned. Welcome back, everyone. We begin this morning with a deep dive into the latest inflation numbers, which are certainly making headlines and impacting our wallets. For more on this, we turn to our reporter, Ethan, who has been digging into the details. Ethan, what can you tell us about the latest Consumer Price Index report?
Grace, good to be with you. The Bureau of Labor Statistics recently delivered a report that's causing quite a stir. The Consumer Price Index, or CPI, which is a key measure of inflation, saw a significant jump in June. According to reporting from the National Association of Home Builders blog and Yahoo Finance, the CPI rose to 2.7% year over year. That's up from 2.4% in May, marking its highest point since February of this year. While this acceleration matched economists' expectations, ABC News did note it remains below the 3% recorded back in January 2025, when President Trump first took office.
So we're seeing a definite uptick. Ethan, many are wondering about the impact of the new tariff policies. How much of this increase can we directly attribute to those?
That's the million-dollar question, Grace, and the answer is quite a bit, especially for certain items. ABC News highlighted that the direct influence of President Donald Trump's tariffs was very evident. We saw accelerated price increases, particularly in commonly imported products. Think clothes, furniture, bed linens, major appliances, toys, and even coffee. For instance, toys saw their prices increase 6 times faster in June than just 2 months prior. Linens rose 5.5%, and coffee jumped 2.2%, which is approximately 7 times the overall inflation rate. Analysts, as reported by ABC News, are pretty clear this is a direct result of the tariffs, explaining that importers often pass along that tax burden, especially when their profit margins are slim. Heather Long, chief economist at Navy Federal Credit Union, commented, as cited by AP News, CBS News, Investopedia.com, and Morningstar.com, quote, "Tariffs are starting to bite American consumers," end quote, who are certainly noticing price increases on everyday items. In fact, EY Parthenon chief economist Gregory Dacko estimated that roughly 1/3 of the June CPI increase was attributable to higher tariffs.
That's a significant bite. And I understand there's more to come. What do we know about upcoming tariffs and their potential impact?
You're absolutely right, Grace. It's not over yet. There's a new barrage of duties scheduled to take effect in just 15 days on August 1st. Yahoo Finance reported that President Trump announced he would send letters to more than 150, quote, smaller trade partners, end quote, notifying them of new general tariff rates of 10% or even 15%. Initial tariffs effective August 1st are set to include levies on pharmaceutical imports and semiconductors, in addition to previously mentioned copper imports and what are being called, quote, reciprocal, end quote, tariffs. We've also seen letters to more than 20 trade partners outlining baseline tariff levels, anywhere from 20% to 40%. Brazil, for example, faces a whopping 50% levy, and just last week, a 35% tariff on Canadian goods was announced, prompting Canada to implement its own new tariff measures on non-U.S. imported steel. Trump also promised 30% duties on Mexico and the European Union, or EU. And in response, the EU is preparing an extensive list of counter-tariffs totaling a staggering 72 billion euros, or $84 billion on American products if talks fail.
That certainly sounds like a costly proposition for everyone. So, with all these tariffs in play, what does this mean for the average American household financially?
It means a heavier lift for our budgets, Grace. The Yale Budget Lab, cited by ABC News, found that consumers currently face an effective tariff rate of 20.6%, which is the highest since 1910. They estimate this will add an additional cost of $2,800 for the average household over the course of the year, so it's not just a drop in the bucket.
Wow, that's a substantial amount. Now, while tariffs are clearly playing a role, are they the only factor contributing to this inflationary environment?
Not at all, Grace. While tariffs are certainly making their presence felt, experts told ABC News that their contribution to the overall rise in inflation last month was actually, quote, modest, end quote. They argue that the, quote, larger price increases were driven predominantly by housing and food products, end quote, which have very little connection to these tariff policies.
So housing and food are still significant drivers. Let's talk about housing in particular. What's the latest there?
Housing inflation continues to be a major non-tariff-related driver, Grace. The National Association of Home Builders blog reported that while overall inflation rose, core inflation, which excludes those volatile food and energy components, came in softer than expected, increasing by 2.9% over the past 12 months. Crucially, housing inflation did show signs of cooling, with the Housing Shelter Index, which accounts for over 40% of the core CPI, increasing by 3.8% over the year. That's its lowest reading since November 2021. On a monthly basis, the Shelter Index rose by 0.2% in June, a slight decrease from May's 0.3% increase. Fan Yu Kuo, NAHB Senior Economist of Forecasting and Analysis, emphasized that rising housing costs are primarily driven by a lack of affordable housing supply and increasing development costs, not tariffs. The NAHB argues that tight monetary policy actually harms housing supply by increasing financing costs for acquisition, development, and construction. They conclude that additional housing supply is the, quote, primary solution, end quote, to tame both housing inflation and overall inflation. It's a supply-side squeeze, not a tariff squeeze, for housing. The food index, for its part, also rose by 3% in June, while the energy component actually fell by 0.8%.
That's interesting, a supply-side squeeze. What about wholesale inflation? Are producers feeling the pinch as much as consumers?
That's where things get a bit curious, Grace. Despite the increase in consumer prices, wholesale inflation, as measured by the Producer Price Index, or PPI, remained flat in June. This actually surprised economists who had anticipated a modest increase. This was due to a decrease in services prices, which offset a 0.3% increase in the price of goods. It suggests that while tariffs were putting pressure on producers, companies were employing various strategies to cope, and in some cases absorbing the levies rather than fully passing them on to consumers. However, experts like Morningstar's Preston Caldwell, as cited by those same news outlets, noted that this dynamic might shift in the latter half of the year, as companies aim to bolster profits. They can only absorb so much.
So companies are holding the line for now, but that might change. What are the implications of all this for the Federal Reserve's monetary policy? Are we still looking at potential interest rate cuts?
That's the big question for financial markets, Grace. The rise in inflation in June, partly attributed to tariffs, definitely dampened expectations among investors for an interest rate cut by the Federal Reserve this summer. Analysts are now suggesting that this data indicates the Federal Reserve will likely hold interest rates steady at its meeting later in July. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell had previously stated that he intended to assess the economic impact of Trump's tariffs before considering reductions in borrowing costs, so he's keeping a close eye on this tariff tango.
He certainly is. And finally, Ethan, what are we hearing from corporations themselves regarding these tariffs and the general economic outlook?
Corporate concerns are certainly mounting, Grace. Rio Tinto, for example, reported that tariffs added $300 million in aluminum costs, a significant hit. And chip industry supplier ASML warned it might not achieve growth in 2026, citing tariff uncertainty, according to Yahoo Finance. While price hikes could escalate in the coming months as another round of levies, some as high as 50% on certain countries and products, take effect on August 1st, some experts propose that a tariff-induced economic slowdown could potentially mitigate upward price pressures by reducing consumer demand. But the overall path of inflation remains quite uncertain, primarily due to Trump's fluctuating policy. Despite these challenges, Trump maintains that his, quote, letters are the deals, end quote, themselves, though he remains open to reaching different agreements through negotiation. It's certainly a dynamic situation.
A dynamic situation indeed, Ethan. It seems we're in for quite a ride this summer. Thank you for that incredibly comprehensive report.
My pleasure, Grace.
When we come back, we'll be discussing story 2 of 2, so stay with us. Welcome back. We turn now to a sobering economic report out of California, detailing the far-reaching financial consequences of intensified immigration enforcement. Our reporter Chloe is here to break down the complex picture. Chloe, what can you tell us about this significant downturn?
Grace, it's quite an eye-opener. A new analysis from UC Merced researchers, specifically led by Edward Flores of the Community and Labor Center, reveals a severe and immediate economic shock to California's private sector. According to reporting from Lookout Santa Cruz and LAist, both originally sourced from CalMatters, the state experienced one of its steepest unemployment surges in recent memory. This spike was surpassed only by the onset of the 2020 coronavirus pandemic, and even exceeded the immediate impact of the 2007-2008 Great Recession. We're talking about a significant drop following federal immigration enforcement raids in Los Angeles in early June of 2025.
Wow, that puts it into stark perspective. So, how immediately did this impact the job market? And who exactly was affected by this sudden employment chill?
The impact was almost instantaneous, Grace. The UC Merced analysis, which utilized U.S. Census Bureau's current population survey data, showed a 3.1% drop in private sector employment in the week immediately following these escalated federal actions. That period specifically compared employment data from May 11th to June 8th, 2025. A raid at a garment factory in downtown Los Angeles was cited as a triggering event. The study estimated this employment decline translated to a loss of approximately 271,541 jobs held by U.S. citizens and 193,428 jobs held by non-citizens. Notably, more citizens than non-citizens reported not working in the week after the initial raid. Edward Flores explained that disruptions to the work done by undocumented immigrants have, quote, ripple effects, end quote, causing slowdowns in other industries and impacting job opportunities for U.S.-born workers. It just goes to show how interconnected our labor market truly is.
That's a fascinating and concerning detail, Chloe. More citizens than non-citizens. But I understand the impact wasn't uniform across all groups. Can you elaborate on the demographic breakdown?
Absolutely, Grace. The UC Merced analysis, as reported by Lookout Santa Cruz and LAist, found that Latino workers in California experienced a 5.6% decline in employment, while white workers saw a 5.3% decrease during this analyzed period. However, in a surprising turn, the same analysis noted concurrent employment gains for other groups. Asian workers experienced a 2.2% increase, and Black workers saw a 5.3% increase during this exact time frame. It's a complex picture, certainly not just a straight drop across the board.
That is truly surprising. What could explain these divergent trends in the job market, where some groups lost ground while others gained?
Well, established economic and sociological theories offer some explanations, Grace. One is called labor market segmentation theory, which suggests that labor markets are divided into distinct segments, often along racial and ethnic lines. Undocumented immigrants, frequently Latino, are often channeled into a, quote, secondary, end quote, labor market, characterized by lower wages and instability, making them particularly vulnerable to raids. When this segment is targeted, job losses occur among these groups. Conversely, other groups, such as some Asian or Black workers, might be engaged in different, more stable segments of the labor market or perceived differently by employers. There's also the concept of labor substitution and complementarity. While immigrant workers are often complements to higher skilled native workers, meaning their removal can disrupt entire production chains, the sudden withdrawal of a labor pool could prompt employers to seek out other available labor, potentially benefiting groups less directly impacted. And finally, there's the element of discrimination and racial and ethnic stratification. Employers fearing sanctions might adjust their hiring practices, leading to de facto discrimination against individuals from perceived high-risk groups. This creates a, quote, chilling effect, end quote, shifting recruitment towards groups seen as, quote, safer, end quote, like Asian or Black workers.
It sounds like a deeply intricate web of factors. Given the significant economic fallout, what actions are the UC Merced researchers recommending for state policymakers, and how has the state responded thus far?
The UC Merced researchers are calling for, quote, significant action, end quote, from state policymakers' grace, including economic stimulus and disaster relief measures, drawing parallels to pandemic-era interventions. Edward Flores highlighted that undocumented immigrants lack a financial safety net, such as unemployment benefits, which not only impacts their families, but also the state's economy. However, state-level economic stimulus specifically for immigration enforcement impacts isn't widely documented historically. Governor Gavin Newsom has twice vetoed attempts by state lawmakers to extend unemployment benefits to undocumented workers, and the state recently cut Medi-Cal benefits for this group due to budget constraints, as reported by Lookout Santa Cruz and LAist. Despite this, Newsom's spokesperson, Tara Gallegos, condemned the Trump administration's, quote, ruthless and cruel, end quote, raids, affirming the governor would continue to fight in court. The California Finance Department has also acknowledged in its economic forecast the, quote, downside risk, end quote, that a large-scale deportation program could, quote, significantly degrade the state's labor force, end quote.
So while the state acknowledges the risk, direct financial relief for this specific impact seems to be a sticky wicket. You mentioned the study used U.S. Census Bureau data. Are there any important details about that data that our viewers should know?
Yes, Grace, there's an important methodological point regarding the U.S. Census Bureau's Current Population Survey, or CPS, which formed the basis of the study. While it collects information on employment status for a particular calendar week, the published data and official reports are actually released monthly, not weekly. This means the CPS data generally do not provide the granular, week-after-week employment changes needed to precisely compare specific weeks for immediate, week-after-week fluctuations, as some news sources that analyze the survey's nature have pointed out. It's a nuance in the data collection versus the reporting.
An important distinction to keep in mind when we look at these numbers. Chloe, this has been an incredibly insightful and detailed report on the economic ripples of immigration enforcement. Thank you for shedding light on such a complex issue for us this morning.
My pleasure, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. In a move that has some crying foul and others' fiscal sanity, the U.S. Senate has cut the cord on significant federal spending. Early Thursday, July 17th, senators approved a package of sweeping funding cuts requested by President Donald Trump. This legislation, now heading back to the House for final approval by Friday, rescinds $9 billion in previously approved spending. About $8 billion targets foreign assistance, impacting emergency aid, while over $1 billion is stripped from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the entity that helps fund NPR and PBS. This could be a static outcome for smaller, rural stations. Republicans champion these cuts as fiscal discipline. Democrats are broadcasting their objections, arguing vital public services will be harmed. Though a fraction of the federal budget, Democrats warn it could cut into future bipartisan funding efforts. Meanwhile, a familiar rate battle continues as Donald Trump, a presidential candidate, maintains his aggressive stance against Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. Trump argues Fed interest rates are too high, stifling economic growth and costing the country a pretty penny. He's verbally assaulted Powell, even threatening his job. Trump also accuses Powell of mismanagement in a costly Fed headquarters renovation, an allegation Powell calls misleading. This ongoing clash of the titans raises concerns about the Federal Reserve's crucial independence. Moving to international waters, the UN Security Council is convening an emergency session today, Thursday, July 17th, over the rapidly escalating Israel-Syria crisis. This urgent meeting was called by Syria following a barrage of Israeli airstrikes. On Wednesday, for the third consecutive day, Israeli jets pounded Damascus, hitting government and presidential areas. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz issued a stark warning. Warnings to Damascus have ended. Now painful blows will come. Syrian officials have struck back verbally, condemning the attacks and demanding UN intervention. The escalation unfolds amidst fierce sectarian clashes in Syria's Druze majority city of Soweto, where a fragile ceasefire has already gone up in smoke, claiming hundreds. Reports also indicate Israeli ground forces are moving deeper into the Syrian Golan Heights, a move the UN says violates a 1974 agreement. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has condemned Israel's escalatory airstrikes, urging de-escalation. It seems the prospects for peace have been blown out of the water. And tragically, in the Gaza Strip, at least 20 Palestinians were killed in a stampede at a food distribution center on Wednesday, July 16th. The incident occurred at a site run by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, an American organization with Israeli support, in Khan Yunis. GHF reported 19 trampled, 1 stabbed. Hamas-run health ministry cited 21 fatalities from tear gas, stampede, and live ammunition. Witnesses claim Israeli troops fired towards crowds, and some accuse GHF workers of using tear gas. The GHF admitted to limited pepper spray use to safeguard additional loss of life, and accused Hamas of fomenting unrest. The UN has criticized the GHF's aid model as inherently unsafe, a truly crushing development in an already desperate region. Finally, closer to home, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., serving as Secretary of Health and Human Services, is reportedly aiming to inject some changes into the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. Kennedy, who previously led an anti-vaccination group, argues the program removes incentives for drug makers to produce safe products. He's reportedly assembled a team to reform the VICP, even reiterating the disproven claim that vaccines cause autism. Experts are vaccine cautious, warning changes could lead manufacturers to cease U.S. sales. Since taking office, Kennedy has made controversial moves, including reportedly reneging on U.S. funding for global vaccinations and firing the Federal Advisory Group. Public health experts fear this shift could spread like wildfire, undermining confidence and leading to a resurgence of preventable diseases like measles. Whispers of a mandate for placebo-controlled trials for all new vaccines could also jab a delay into critical public health efforts. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Sonnet 4.0, Gemini Pro 2.5, Gemini Flash 2.5, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.